Have you ever heard of kings who ruled for tens of thousands of years? It sounds like something straight out of a fantasy novel, but what if I told you there's an ancient artifact that lists exactly that? Today, we're diving deep into one of history's most baffling documents, the Sumerian king list. This incredible text claims that just 8 kings ruled for a mind-boggling total of 241,200 years before a great flood swept across the land. So, what's the real story behind these impossibly long reigns? Were these kings gods, aliens, or is there a more down-to-earth explanation? Let's unravel this ancient mystery together. First, let's set the stage. We're talking about ancient Sumer, the cradle of civilization, located in modern-day Iraq. Around 5,000 years ago, the Sumerians were pioneers. They invented writing, the wheel, and built the world's first cities. And in one of these cities, they created the Sumerian king list. This isn't just one document, but a collection of clay tablets and cylinders, with the most famous version being the well-blundell prism, housed at the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. It's a 4-sided prism, covered in cuneiform script, listing a succession of Sumerian kings, city by city. The list begins with a truly jaw-dropping statement. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. It then names Alulim as the first king, who supposedly ruled for 28,800 years. He was followed by Alanger, who reigned for an even longer 36,000 years. The list continues through 5 different cities and a total of 8 kings before the flood, each with a reign spanning millennia. The final pre-flood king, Ubaratutu of Shuruppak, ruled for 18,600 years. When you add it all up, you get that astonishing figure, 241,200 years. After this section, the list simply says, "Then the floods swept over." Following this cataclysmic event, it states that kingship once again descended from heaven, this time in the city of Kish. The kings who ruled after the flood have much more believable, though still long, lifespans. For example, the first post-flood king, Jushur, is listed as ruling for 1,200 years. As the list progresses closer to the time it was written, the reigns become shorter and more realistic, eventually listing historical figures we can actually verify through other archaeological evidence, like Gilgamesh of Uruk. So, how do we make sense of this? The most obvious question is about those pre-flood reigns. 36,000 years for one king? It's simply not possible for a human being. This has led to all sorts of fascinating theories. One of the most popular, especially in ancient astronaut circles, is that these early kings weren't human at all. The theory suggests they were extraterrestrial beings, or at least beings with incredibly long lifespans, who came to Earth to guide early humanity. They brought knowledge, established the first cities, and ruled as godlike figures. The kingship descending from heaven could be a literal description of their arrival from the stars. In this view, the Great Flood might have been a planet-wide event that marked the end of their direct rule. Another, more mythological interpretation sees these early kings as gods or demigods. In many ancient cultures, the lines between gods, mythical heroes, and historical rulers were often blurred. The Sumerians had a rich pantheon of deities, and it is possible that these first 8 kings were actually gods who were later historicized and placed at the beginning of a human king list to give it divine authority. Their impossibly long reigns would symbolize their divine, eternal nature, not a literal time frame. It was a way for later kings to legitimize their own rule by tracing their lineage back to the gods themselves. But what about a more grounded, historical explanation? Some scholars believe the numbers aren't meant to be taken literally at all. They might be symbolic. In Sumerian numerology, certain numbers held great significance. The number 60 was the base of their mathematical system, which is why we still have 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour. These huge numbers, often multiples of 60, might have been a way to express the immense power, prestige, and importance of these early rulers, not their actual age. A reign of 36,000 years could simply be a scribe's way of saying this king was incredibly powerful and his reign felt like an eternity. There's also the theory of scribal error or mistranslation over time. The Sumerian king list was copied by hand for centuries. It's possible that the original numbers were much smaller and were exaggerated over time. Perhaps a symbol for 10 was misread as a symbol for 600, and as the text was copied again and again, these errors compounded, leading to the astronomical figures we see today. Another idea is that the numbers don't represent years, but a different, much shorter unit of time, like months or seasons. If we were to recalculate the rains based on a different timescale, they might become more plausible. Now let's talk about the flood. Then the flood swept over. This single line is one of the most intriguing parts of the text. It's a clear parallel to other great flood myths from around the world, most famously the story of Noah's Ark in the Bible. In fact, the Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh contains its own detailed flood story, featuring a man named Utnapishtim who builds a giant boat to survive a flood sent by the gods. The similarities are striking. Archaeologists have found evidence of major, localized flooding in ancient Mesopotamia around 2900 BCE. It's possible that a particularly devastating historical flood was mythologized over generations, becoming the great, world-ending cataclysm described in the King list. This event served as a clear dividing line in their history: the mythical, godlike era before the flood, and the more human, historical era that followed. The post-flood section of the list is where it starts to align more with what we know from archaeology. While the rains are still exaggerated at first, they gradually decrease to believable lengths. It lists dynasties from cities like Kish, Uruk, and Uar, and it includes names that have been confirmed elsewhere. For example, Enmebargizi of Kish is mentioned in the list, and archaeologists have found inscriptions with his name on them, making him the earliest Sumerian ruler we can confirm through physical evidence. This transition from myth to history within the same document is what makes the Sumerian king list so unique. It's not just a dry list of names. It's a narrative about the Sumerian understanding of their own past, from a divine, mythical origin to a tangible, human present. So what was the purpose of the king list? It wasn't just a history textbook. It was a powerful piece of political propaganda. The list promotes the idea that kingship is a single, continuous institution handed down from the gods, which passes from one city to another. At any given time, only one city held the official kingship. This was a way for the rulers of the dominant city at the time the list was compiled to justify their power. By saying, "Look, the kingship was in Eridu, then Shuruppak, and now it's here with us," they were claiming a divine mandate to rule over all of Sumer. It was a tool to unify a region of competing city-states under a single, divinely sanctioned authority. In the end, the Sumerian king list remains an enigma. It's a blend of myth, legend, and actual history that challenges our modern perceptions of the past. Were the first 8 kings aliens, gods, or simply mythical figures whose reigns were exaggerated for political or symbolic reasons? Was the Great Flood a global catastrophe or a localized disaster that grew into legend? We may never know for sure, but the list gives us an invaluable window into the minds of the ancient Sumerians. It shows us how they saw their world, their connection to the divine, and the deep, sacred history that gave their civilization meaning. It reminds us that for the earliest civilizations, history wasn't just a record of events. It was a grand story where gods and humans walked the earth together and where kingship was a gift from the heavens. What do you think? Are you on Team Ancient Aliens, Team Mythological Symbolism, or do you think there's a more logical explanation for these incredible reigns? Let me know your theories down in the comments. Thanks so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this journey into the ancient past, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more mysteries from history. See you next time.